morning. I'm Ken Biberaj, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought and leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. In the news today, President Biden delivered his State of the Union speech last night, and LeBron James broke Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's NBA scoring record. It's an exciting morning in America. Today's topic is creating a better world through design, and we're joined by Diane Hoskins, the co-CEO of Gensler, the world's largest architectural firm. Good morning, Diane.
Good morning, Ken.
Thanks for hosting us. I know you insisted on me being here and inviting hundreds of my closest friends and you providing coffee for them. So cheers to you, and thanks for the hospitality and joining us today.
Thank you, Ken. My pleasure.
So just to kick it off, Gensler's more than an architectural firm, and you're more than a CEO. You're a true thought leader. And I think to tie it a little bit to the State of the Union yesterday, right? The world is facing massive crisis after crisis, whether it's climate change, global conflict, financial recession. There's a lot to kind of be concerned about. What are you optimistic about in 2023?
Well,
if anything.
Absolutely. Again, you can feel the energy in this room, and it's just that optimism and that kind of focus on the future. Literally 3 years ago, we would not have been here together. We all know that, and we have come a long way. And if there's one thing we can be optimistic about, is the fact that we are way beyond this, tremendous challenge that we all face with COVID. I mean, that to me gives me incredible faith in what we can overcome if we focus on it. But there are so many reasons to be optimistic, and we hear it from clients that are here in the room and around the world. But again, when we talk about some of the big challenges, as you said, climate change, it hasn't gone away. In fact, it's getting closer and closer to that time when we're like feeling, if the world gets warmer, there's no turning back some of the effects that we'll start to experience. That is still there, and that is so serious and so much something we all need to be focused on. But at the same time, we work with thousands of clients around the world. There hardly is a client today that isn't saying, how can my project be more sustainable? How do I do net zero design? Here are my ESG goals. We're going to be, decarbonized by 2030 or 2050. And so the level of energy and focus is extraordinary, and that makes me incredibly optimistic. The same thing on social justice. We've seen so much focused energy, and it hasn't receded. George Floyd, it'll be 3 years when we get to about, June or July. It's a really, unfortunate and heartbreaking situation that really has changed the world. But we haven't forgot that lesson. In fact, we're seeing, incredible follow through and continuing commitment of resources, time, energy, programs to make sure that we don't face that moment again. We're more diverse here at Gensler than we have ever been in our history. And even in some of the, statistics across the U.S., Black unemployment is at an all-time low at 5%. There's so many things to be optimistic and excited about, but there is a lot of work still to come that we need to be focused on. And the same thing with what we're hearing as it relates to our economy and the world economy. And I know a lot of folks here are in the real estate industry, and it has been said, we are in a recession when it comes to that particular sector. But at the same time, it's opening up opportunity for transformation that we've never seen before. And I think as we look at our cities and really become much more intentional about what kind of cities do we want, this could be the moment where we're starting to see the kinds of transformations that we've always wanted.
So you've been CEO of Gensler for a while now, but these last 3 years must have been challenging, right? So tell us a little bit about what it's been like to be a CEO through the pandemic, this recovery, and also just the reach of Gensler, right? You're a global firm, but like how many people, how many countries, how material is that reach, and how do you leverage it?
Yeah, well, I've been CEO for 18 years, but definitely these last 3 years have been extraordinary.
Like another 18, right?
Right, another 18. And, I think everything we learned up till that point, was something that we used as we moved through this last 3 years. Look, we've all been through recessions before. Many of us certainly have, with even going back to the S&L crisis and the dot-com situation and the Great Recession. I think those were all kind of the training wheels or the beginning of some of the how you get through these challenging times, including, what we all witnessed with 9/11, with the level, especially with this community, all of us here, we know where we were, what happened that day, the kind of, unbelievably, frightening situation that was. That was a 100th of what we all went through during COVID. And so, again, a lot of lessons that were brought to bear for us as an organization, and what you do, first and foremost, focusing on our people, focusing on their well-being, making sure that everyone was safe, making sure that we were able to work together through our systems. We'd already invested in incredible technologies that allowed us to put all of our projects in the cloud and be able to work seamlessly together around the world. We did have a little bit of a precursor because we have a Shanghai and Hong Kong office and Beijing office. So they had been through this work from home and a lot of the issues a month before us here in the States. So we understood some of the extreme nature of what happens when COVID was, rampant in the community. But more than anything, I think the key was to begin to help focus on our clients, help them think about their future, begin to put a vision around the post-COVID world. And that really launched us into research that we were doing, forums that we were hosting virtually, again, doing surveys of workers that then informed our messaging out to our clients so they could begin to chart their path. And I think that was really from the client side, that really kept us front and center. And it has allowed us to grow and thrive since the lockdown and since we've been back in person again. Of course, like everyone, our business went down that first year. I think it was something like 20%. We came back 15% the first year out of COVID. We've come back over 28% this past year on top of that. And the outlook for the year ahead is similar.
That's amazing. You're a strong advocate for cities, right? You spend time in Chicago and Los Angeles, New York, and now here in DC. What are your thoughts on the future of cities and the resiliency and how we have to rethink how we have utilized cities in the past?
The cities are again, we've kind of taken them for granted, just like we've taken workplace for granted. And now everything is kind of being questioned and in flux. And from a design standpoint, for all of us who are designers in the room, it's an exciting time because it's when you start to question some of the assumptions, and maybe those assumptions were based on paradigms from the past and that aren't as valuable to us today. And we see that with workplace, and it's the same thing with our cities. We are in a time of transformation, definitely. Throughout my career, I was born and raised in Chicago and worked my first job in architecture in Chicago, working on a 30-story tower and, in a big firm. I think it kind of set me in a certain direction. But I really learned, again, the craft of design and focus on creating a great city as Chicago is, and the thinking about not just the building, but how that building is helping to shape that city. I worked also in New York, and that's where I really learned and focused on clients. And I, really pivoted toward workplace interiors and working with great clients to help to achieve their vision. And that's so much a part of what our cities are and how our cities thrive is, the people, the companies, how do these places really ignite success for organizations and for people? I moved to Los Angeles and got my MBA and actually worked in that community, had my first experience as the leader of an office in Los Angeles, and really the power and the importance of innovation and, that spirit of reinvention. And, again, this is what we have to be thinking about as we look at, even just transportation is changing. We know, I mean, these scooters aren't going away, right? Electric vehicles need charging. We're hearing about, all types of autonomous vehicles and these sorts of other modes of transportation. And our cities have to respond to that. And then being here in DC, and I've been in this community for over 20 years now, and I appreciate so many people in this room, frankly, who helped me to become part of this community in such an important way. And thank you for, 20 years ago, taking me under your wing, Linda, and others, Ray. But, this community taught me about the power of purpose. And, working with the phenomenal clients, the NGOs, the think tanks, the Brookings Institution, the various departments of our government that think about the mission, and really realizing the power of what we do in design and in placemaking to enable the mission of these great organizations that are focused on creating a better world. So, I think it's all those things together as we look at our cities. And, I believe at the end of the day that this is, we'll look back and this will be a Renaissance moment as we rethink our cities and embrace the opportunities of transformation of buildings, of new types of, mobility, of using, offices as destinations. And these are all, themes that we talk about in design forecast, but these are the things that probably in all of our, careers for the next 10 years, these are going to be the themes of what we are creating and what we're doing across our cities.
Diane loves you guys all so much that you are going to get a copy of Gensler's Design Forecast 2023 today. It's pretty amazing. We have it here today. Tell us a little bit about this. What are people going to see in your mega trends, some of these topics and then also how you source the data. I mean, it was a global kind of survey and effort, and your research institute leading the way on it.
Yeah, Gensler Design Forecast is our annual publication where we talk about trends that are really looking across all of the sectors that we practice in, from the work sector to the lifestyle sector to what's going on in our communities to the health sector. And this goes across, 25 or so different areas of practice, from law firms to tech to, stadiums, airports, et cetera. And for those of you who have followed Design Forecast over the years, this year we did something a little bit different. At the beginning of Design Forecast, we actually kind of pulled through what are the 10 common trends that literally, translate across all geographies, that translate across, frankly, all sectors. And to really bring, up to a higher level, a conversation about those things that aren't just about workplace or aren't just about tech or aren't just about what's happening with sports, but literally that you're starting to see show up in unique ways across the board. And I would, say, if you only read like 4 pages, those, early on pages in the book are going to be valuable to you because you all work in, across geographies, in real estate in particular, as we're seeing this transformation. So, the first important trend of those 10 is this idea of reclaiming experience. Over COVID, and certainly when we all went into the lockdowns and before we had vaccines, we had to separate, not only from each other, but from the places that we experience life. And so this kind of absence of place, I mean, we probably all existed in one place called our homes, where we had to, consume entertainment or do work or engage with our families or, the restaurant at the dining table every day. Again, that was the range of experience that we were able to engage in. And it was very, very clear that it's through going to places that we have these deep, rich experiences. And so this, this journey back to and reclaiming, and we're using this term reclaiming experience in our lives. And even beyond kind of the going back to is really a heightened expectation around what those places offer us in terms of experience. And even the fact that, you know, with the absence that and I think, you know, many of us have felt like you want to go to that really great hotel, you're not going to go to like a, you know, average one anymore, or, you know, you want to go to the best restaurant you can go to. I mean, there's almost a heightened expectation and desire now, having gone through this bit of, you know, separation from these experiences. I want to go experience, you know, that city, that country I've never been to, and I'm going to do it now, you know, this kind of uptick in travel. And so this reclaiming of experience, we believe, is an important trend. It goes across all of our sectors, and you see it, you know, again, manifest in different ways, but it is definitely an opportunity for design.
Interesting. So we lived through a forced live-work environment. Everybody did, right? But what are your thoughts, and it's one of the trends, about live-work vis-a-vis cities? Now, cities should be thinking more holistically. You've touched upon it, but you know, how intentional do cities need to be? How do you organize government, educational institutions, private sector, right? Everybody acts autonomously, but we're all connected, especially when you're thinking about cities, right?
Absolutely. And live work is one of the trends that you'll see in the top 10 in design forecasts.
But out of your house, right?
Yeah. So, you know, it shows up in a lot of interesting ways. And we've been talking about mixed use for a while in our cities. And we've seen now the data is in that when we, you know, look at mixed use developments where you've got, you know, a mix of office and hospitality and, you know, F&B and residential, or some kind of a mix, that each of those pieces performs better than single-use product in a similar area. So they're actually financially performing better when there's this mix of uses. So you can really see that value proposition showing up. So we've been talking about mixed use, and now it is, you know, again, starting to be understood from the standpoint of the demand side, that this is what people want. We've seen and heard a huge conversation about the 20-minute city or the 15-minute city, however you want to, you know, I think Jody McLean says the 12.5-minute city. So, and she's measured it. But you know, again, this point that people want to have greater adjacency to where they live, where they work, where they shop. And that 20 minutes is really, you know, 20 minutes in the car or on the bus or on your bike or on the scooter or walking, but this idea of proximity and closer proximity to create the lifestyle that people are looking for. I mean, this is, you know, deeply embedded in some of the planning strategies in Paris, which is where it really got a lot of attention and focus, but it's really become the conversation even in our disinvested cities where, you know, there might be so much residential, but there's no work opportunities. And now you're starting to see more development of mixed use places and destinations for work and, you know, living and so forth, even in, you know, south side of Chicago and other cities that are recognizing that, you know, this is what people are looking for. There's access to labor markets if you're closer to, you know, places where people live. But this also shows up in the design of any given place, like workplaces. And we, you know, talk about workplace a lot, but we can even talk about it from the standpoint of hospitality. People want to work where there is, you know, where they're staying, you know, as a hotel. But also in our workplaces, and we can dive into this a little bit more, the influence of life, you know, lifestyle, the influence of residential, the influence of hospitality, and the recognition that every place is a social place and that needs to be accommodated in the kinds of design that we create.
You go to concert halls, restaurants, museums, they're packed. Office has been a bit of a lagging kind of aspect to cities, I think, when you look at New York and occupancy rate, DC, et cetera. Talk a little bit about that, the workplace, the office environment. There's literally young people who graduated 3 years ago who have never had to commute or be in an office. How do you think about making the office a destination, and what should, you know, your clients, our clients be thinking about?
So office as destination is the number 10 trend that we talk about in design forecast. And I mean, as we know, again, this has been such a conversation through COVID. I mean, I've been involved in workplace design for most of my career. Our firm has, been designing workplaces for over 50 years. I don't think any of us ever thought that workplace was going to make it to the front of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, but it is definitely a hot topic. And, again, we've had many Gensler folks in particular being quoted and interviewed. So it has been exciting from the standpoint of the recognition that the workplace is an important investment and that the value of workplace needs to be understood better. So what better moment than when we didn't have our workplaces to begin to really study the workplace. So we actually started surveying people during COVID. I mean, we had been surveying people for the last 10 years in their workplaces, but really surveying people during COVID, and then really since then through coming back and so on and so forth. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about our most recent survey, which was concluded literally about 6 to 8 weeks ago, talking about, again, these same dynamics that we're all watching. Although I want to sidetrack for a moment, I think Castle came out with data saying last week that for the first time since COVID, that occupancy was above 50%. At which, again, you're just seeing a pretty robust uptick in their data, which is definitely starting to be, I think, a trend that is very exciting to see as you look at, our workplaces and really people getting the value from these places and by choice coming into the workplace. But one of the interesting questions that was asked in the survey that we just did was, ideally, what are you looking for in the workplace? What are the kinds of spaces that would make you want to be in your workplace? And it was, these were thousands of respondents across the US, across Canada, and I believe we also did this in the UK as well. And, it was really interesting. There were an array of different types of spaces that were listed and for people to really talk about the kinds of things that they would consider their ideal mix. Yeah. And, what was probably the most fascinating, although maybe not surprising, is that for different sectors, the mix was different. Law firms, people who were, working in law firms, it was, kind of a corporate environment, but with, a kind of coffee shop feel in some of the spaces, ability to focus with kind of library type spaces in terms of the experience, but also this, notion of almost a hospitality look and feel. When we got to tech, it was really much more the focus on the coffee shop feel and residential as kind of what they're looking for in terms of some of the amenities and the, again, the mix that they wanted. And it really literally is a different mix for across the 10 industry sectors. And I guess I would say to the building owners and people who are working with tenants out there that, we see these things out there in the environment and it feels like, maybe there's kind of one story that you can pitch in terms of what your building offers. And you're saying kind of those same amenities as it relates to this law firm you're talking to, or this government agency you're talking to, or a tech company. But in reality, it's very different. And even the language you're using to define these amenities needs to really wrap around the headset of these different sectors. And the other part was, as again, maybe not surprising, but generationally, there was a different ideal mix as well, where, again, the three, the Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, their top kind of, defining metaphor was the coffee shop.
See how pick we are, it's
Where for the boomers, it was corporate. And so again, the majority, 75 to 80% of our workforce right now is Gen X, Millennial, and Z. And so I think we need to pay attention to, again, these dynamics, the generational dynamics that are in our workplace today, and be able to design the right kind of amenities that these workers are looking for and that they're going to thrive in. I think the other really important data point was, if you had these amenities, would you be more likely to work in the office? And 85%, 85 to 90% actually, of Gen X, Millennials, and Zs said yes. Only 52% of boomers said yes. So I think the bringing the boomers back is going to be about, again, some of these kind of amenities and places, but it's going to need some real focus because it's a bigger and more complex picture. But I think we also know that this is an important part of most organizations, especially as we try to groom and train. And many of the younger generations are in the workplace to be able to be mentored by people who have 20, 30 years of experience. So I think we really need to look at, this dichotomy in terms of the mix of amenities and, again, but address even more than perhaps the amenity side of it, and really look at some of the kinds of work strategies that are going to appeal to different generations.
I think across cities, you're seeing a bit, and you talk about it with some of the trends, a bit of a flight to quality. There's an amenity war across buildings in cities around the country and world, but there's also an uptick in vacancy rate in buildings. So the pessimist in me says there's going to be a lot of buildings that just may not make it through in the next few years. But the optimist in me, I think, says, wow, what an opportunity to rethink some of that real estate and how it exists. How are you thinking about 5 years, 10 years down the road? Do we have too many office buildings? Do harder conversations need to be happening sooner? Scott Reckler at RXR in New York is talking about some of their assets now pretty publicly that may not make it in current conditions.
Yeah. No, this is, look, it's a kind of the moment of truth for our office buildings. I guess there's been an expansion of our office buildings probably since, the beginning of the 19th century. And so there's been this constant growth, right? Eventually it was going to start to max out. And so I think we are at that moment where we're, there's this kind of moment of truth. Are we overbuilt in certain markets? And, the fact is there are certain markets that are overbuilt. We do a lot of work in Baltimore, and you see that, a tenant goes from building to building, new building to new building, and nothing ever goes behind that tenant. And so that's, again, that's not a healthy market where it's just add of space without the addition of new jobs. Being married to someone in economic development, that's the calculus, is if new jobs aren't coming in, we've got to be very, very careful about adding new product. And as we've seen in the reduction of, or I should say, the increase in densities in our workplaces over the last 10 to 15 years, before, I guess maybe you'd say like in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, you might have planned out for 200 square feet per person, or each job is going to be 200 square feet of additional demand, where today it might be half of that. So again, what is driving the additional demand in the market is something that has been in flux. And I think a few of our cities were ahead of themselves, probably even before COVID. So you have this kind of overbuilt, potential in certain cities. And then on top of that, we have had this post-COVID lag of returning into office, which has also created, challenges for the office sector. And then adding on top of that, we have sustainability and the kind of regulations and the environment that is saying, look, buildings need to move toward being net zero. They have to decarbonize. They have to lower their emissions. And, you know, some buildings are going to be able to get there and some buildings won't be able to get there. So we have, you know, these three dynamics going on. We're in fact studying many office buildings in markets across the US, Canada, Europe for conversion and conversion, you know, in one sense to residential. In fact, you know, we've developed a tool to be able to do this literally in about 20 minutes, where if we have the information, it is, you know, putting it into the algorithms that we've developed that really are looking at bay depth and ceiling height and loading and, you know, again, the configuration of the building to really determine, is it a viable candidate for an investment in a conversion? And, you know, some cities even after doing that, like the city of Calgary, which has an over 30% vacancy rate, and at the same time, a need to create a massive amount of housing. They are actually incentivizing building owners to be able to, you know, transition buildings to residential. You know, we've seen this in other cities. The city of Chicago studied LaSalle Street and how those conversions might be able to occur on that one corridor within their city. And I think we've done some studies in buildings here in DC. Obviously, we all know our dimensions of our buildings here are challenging. Scale of floor plates are challenging, but at the same time, you know, we've got to figure out how we're going to either transition to residential, transition to data center, transition to other possible uses as we're equalizing, you know, what is the right, you know, kind of supply and demand when it comes to office buildings. There definitely is a flight to quality. And there's a, you know, a different vacancy rate when you look at buildings that are 20 years old or less and 20 years old or older. It's definitely the tale of two cities. So at this, you know, again, it's a very exciting time. It's also a very challenging time. And of course, with, you know, the interest rate issues, you know, there are some real pressures in the real estate industry, but we are seeing in certain cities, in fact, in Baltimore, where some very ambitious developers are, have bought key parts of the Inner Harbor. And we are working with them to rethink the Inner Harbor with levels of density and residential developments that will absolutely transform Baltimore City. So, you know, again, we're seeing where these transformations are in place and starting, and places where they are just beginning.
Well, we're just about out of time, but just one last question. From our advisory work at Savills, and I'm curious on the Gensler slide, it seems like there's just more of a consultative approach at the beginning, right? Where maybe we would go through a process a little faster. Has that evolved on your end in terms of, you know, people just trying to figure this out, like how to get people back, what's the ethos of their office, how do they do it, how much space, et cetera? I mean, has that kind of changed, or is it status quo with how you run your engagements, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure like everyone here, you know, it is absolutely changed. You know, sort of
just hire Savills and get
well, and you know, the folks in this room, you know, the brain trust right here. You know, it's not just a guess anymore, and it's not just a build what you had before anymore. And you've got the CEO kind of, you know, in the middle of it as well. So there's a whole different community that is involved. We'll have the CEO, the, you know, HR, even marketing in terms of brand, and obviously IT. I mean, they're all at the table now. And so it's not just, let's have a list of, you know, spaces that you need, or let's just kind of make what you did last time look better. It is an extraordinarily exciting time for our industry. And we are seeing, and we are offering into the market new kinds of services that, you know, maybe we had been doing, but in more of the margins versus the main focus, where now a full-on type of consultancy, as you mentioned, is part of it. Our workplace survey, which, again, is a tool that we developed over 10 years ago, is something that we're using constantly now to help our clients understand how people work, what are the work modes that are important to people, how much of their time they're spending in different, whether it's virtual or in-person collaborations, and also, the focus time that is so much forgotten these days, because we like to talk about the collective pieces, but people are screaming for, can I just have a quiet place to work? And so actually in those amenities I was talking about a few moments ago, library space is, ranks high for everyone in terms of what they're looking for in their workspace. It's not, someplace to bring my dog or all these other things. Could I get a quiet space at the office, as well as these wonderful collaborative areas? So yes, I mean, it is, an amazing time. I think there's a lot of risk right now for companies. In fact, Francisco and I were talking about a project where, it just recently was finished. I won't say the name, but literally just built out new space, and the client is taking more space immediately. And, the conversation is we didn't take enough space. We were looking at, how many people were coming in the office. We kind of assumed that was going to be the way it was going to stay. And so I think there's, we've got to kind of get ahead of things. We have to see what the trends are. We have to anticipate. But we also have to recognize that, we're building a space that is going to last for a number of years. And so this kind of ability to project a bit, and also, of course, have the kind of flexibility, which, again, I guess is maybe not as easy said as done, but this is what we're seeing right now. In fact, that's not the only client who has immediately after moving in said, we need more space. So it is about a, serious consultancy. It is, I was telling a reporter a couple of weeks ago, it is the math. Do the math. And that's what we try to do, is to really show, the implications of some of these kinds of decisions. You don't want to close off opportunity. You want to give yourself enough flexibility for the future.
Diane Hoskins.
Yes.